this is Tarnell Brown of the Lucky Libertarian. It has been quite a while since I have been on YouTube, so I want to start by saying that it is a pleasure to be here again. Today, I want to talk a little bit about tariffs, since they are much in the news these days. And as I can only say so much in a limited time, let's jump right into it. This past week, President Trump has floated the idea of placing a 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% tariff on imported aluminum. I know most people have a general idea of what a tariff is, but for those who do not, in simplest terms, it is a levy or a tax on imports. The theory is that tariffs protect American consumers and workers from foreign competition, but that's exactly where my problem lies. You see, a free market is competition. That's all it is. Consumers satisfy their utility by deciding which provider of a product or service is the best use of their scarce resources, and this is done via the pricing mechanism. When import duties restrict choice, alternatives disappear from the market and prices rise, distorting market signals and placing consumers at a decided disadvantage. In other words, government public policy picks winners and losers, with the consumer always being on the losing side. Now, the president says that the U.S. steel industry is being negatively impacted by some nations, especially China, unfairly dumping cheap steel in both global and U.S. markets, and there's some truth to that. That's what nations at a developmental disadvantage do in order to compete with goods and services produced in more mature markets. China, after all, will do what's best for China. The question is, are Trump's retaliatory measures what's best for America? And the answer to that is a resounding no. The most obvious manner in which this harms domestic citizens is the rise in price of the product being protected. In the case of steel and aluminum, so many products depend on them that large-scale price increases across many industries would be a given. You can call this a hidden tax, or you can call it hidden inflation. Both would be correct. But more than this, it is also a regressive tax on the lowest income members of society. Now, the Make America Great Again MAGA populists would have you believe that this is an acceptable outcome because more jobs. But again, they would be wrong. While steel and aluminum manufacturers would benefit some from higher prices, that is largely wiped out by higher input costs. Because they are now effectively locked into producing everything domestically to save their profit margins, they are eventually going to cut costs. And while they might not be able to do much about production costs, they can and they will cut labor costs in the long run. This is not the only way tariffs destroy domestic employment. While the U.S. is the world's third largest exporter, it is also the world's largest importer. By placing import levies against an input so prevalent within the things we manufacture, jobs dependent upon import will be destroyed. Historically, for every 15 export-dependent jobs so-called saved by tariffs, 20 import-dependent jobs are lost. That is a deficit, ladies and gentlemen. In addition, as discussed before, many domestic industries depend on steel and aluminum. When George W. Bush placed a 30% tariff on imported steel back in 2002, some 200,000 jobs in other industries were lost. Their employers simply couldn't afford the cost of domestic steel as an input. None of this even takes into account the possibility of retaliation by trade partners, whose lives our tariffs have unnecessarily made more difficult than they had to be. Trade wars, which our president absurdly claims are easily won, simply distort the demand curve, creating oversupply in the domestic market with no outlet to market the excess. Imports aren't the solution because tariffs. Such nonsense, in the form of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, exacerbated already reeling market fundamentals and contributed to the Great Depression. Trade wars are always a disaster for the nation most being retaliated against. Of course, We can always hide the inevitable job losses, hidden inflation, loss of purchasing power, and the like with massive public infrastructure projects like, I don't know, building walls. Hey, you know who else thought that tariffs, trade wars, and massive infrastructure projects were neat? This guy. This guy right here. Donald, really, it's 2018, dude. Mercantilism isn't a thing. I'm going to need you to get a grip. You are effectively calling for an embargo on your own citizens, and this madness must cease. This has been Tarnell Brown of the Lucky Libertarian. Back to Chris and Steve. Lucky Lib, out.